Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello, and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 143 different nations, looking for the best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And of course, we're looking for the leaders, the people that are making a difference that actually can enhance and expand and leverage these technologies, services, and products. And we're going to be looking at the European Union. Some of the activities are going on there, and also the organizations that are making a difference within those societies that in turn are leveraging to meet the needs of the planet's now some 7 billion souls as we move towards 2050 and 9 billion people on this planet. And so we have a very active organization that's located within the United States, but also around the globe. We have Gunter Hormendinger, who is the Counselor for Environment. He is with the delegation of the European Union to the United States. I must say, Gunter, that's one of the longest names that we have in Washington, D.C., but you're doing very important work here. And welcome to the Emerald Planet.
Thank you very much, Sam. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. And you know, we want to start off and we want to talk about, you know, water and wastewater. That's really the thrust of what we're talking about. But a lot of people may want to know just about the delegation itself and why the term delegation.
Delegation. Well, we are the representation of the European Union in the United States. And we are basically doing for the European Union what the embassies are doing for our member states. So the European Union has representations all over the globe, all over. In each country we have a delegation, so we have one here in Washington as well. And our job is to do the diplomatic outreach, the liaison with the United States.
And if you could mention, you actually do have a leader of the delegation who is called an ambassador, certified to the President of the United States. Would you like to introduce your ambassador?
Well, my ambassador, João Vale de Almeida, he's of course the boss of the whole operation here, and you might have seen him on some other stations lately because of course we've been in the news. And yeah, so we are here driving our mutual interest forward. You know, the Americans and the Europeans, they have a lot in common, and it's our job to further that mutual interest.
Well, I think it's absolutely fantastic that you're here, and your title, Counselor of Environment. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that entail? And then what we want to do is just kind of segue that right into the water and wastewater emphasis of our discussion this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, environment policy is one of those policies that are of importance everywhere. There is an environment policy here in the United States. There is one in Europe. We have a common interest. We also have sometimes difference in views. And it's my job to reach out to the United States, to understand what they're up to make them understand what we do, and to try to find the best way forward for us both.
Well, you're looking at, let's go ahead and bring this first slide. We're going to use this as a backdrop, the map that we have here. But looking at the 27 nations that are members and represented through your delegation, why have the offices here? I know you're talking about you really want to understand mutual cooperation and communications between the two. Well, how does it actually work so that you're learning about the United States, transferring this to your 27 members, but also bringing that information and sharing with the United States government, but also the citizens here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I should be very clear. Of course, each and every one of our member states has their own embassy here.
Of
course, they retain that, and they are represented here in Washington. But we also have the EU delegation, and we coordinate very closely with them. So we have a common outlook and a common agenda here. And it's like having extra feet on the ground, really. So that's what makes the added value. Yeah, I see that you've brought up the next slide, which is a rather unusual map of Europe, and it takes us into the topic today, which is water policy, because what you see here on this great slide is not countries, it's river basins. And until, a few years ago, until before 2000, water policy was, of course, an issue, all the different aspects of water policy, floods and water quality and wastewater and so on. And they were dealt with in a piecemeal manner, something here, something there, some member states doing more, others doing less. And this map is the outcome of an attempt to bring it all together. So we now have something called the Water Framework Directive, which is really based around water basins. And one of its innovations is that it links up the authorities managing those areas in different countries across borders.
Yeah, I wanted to bring us right into focus here as far as a full slide on this, because this is one of the things, Gunter, as we look at the Earth is becoming warmer. It's also becoming drier in many different areas, and we've talked about lack of water and the impact on just the production of electricity. If you have moving bodies that are not able to cool, say, nuclear reactors or even hydro schemes. So looking at this map, if we're looking at this around the globe, what's going to be the impact of this, and how then do we extrapolate this information around the globe as far as what's really going on?
Right. Well, what we see is, of course, the pressures on water quality rising. We have a number of impacts. We use all those waters commercially, so we have a lot of dams, we have a lot of diversions, a lot of artificial infrastructure that impacts on the aquatic life and on the quality of the water. We abstract a lot of water for all sorts of reasons, for agriculture, for industrial use, and for, as you say, for energy production. In fact, an astonishing 44% of all the water that we abstract is used for energy production, mostly for cooling. That water mostly goes back into the rivers, but of course it's got to be there in the first place to be used. So droughts are a rising issue.
Well, and the whole thing too, as far as the population, there are certain populations within Europe either stagnant or declining as far as expansion, but in general the population base is still expanding, across the 27 member states. And so you're getting more pressure as far as water, extracting it, from the aquifers, from all the surface water, the rivers, the ponds, the lakes that you have. And so coordinating this policy really is very important.
Indeed it is, and I think everybody sees the necessity of that. What you see here is an overview of what the water quality is like in Europe, and that's also an outflow of that framework directive, that for the first time we have a common understanding of how we judge the quality of the water, and it goes in 5 classes, from excellent to bad. And what you see here, blue and green are the good ones. Blue is excellent and green is good, and the red and the orange is what you don't want. And you see that there is a mixed picture here. So we could say that the water glass is half full at the moment. But we've set ourselves objectives for reaching a good water quality in 2015 all across Europe, and that's going to be a tough call.
Well, one of the things that you're doing, and this is what I've really appreciated about you, the times we've actually had a chance to discuss these various issues, is being very open and sharing about, what Europe is doing as far as setting up policies, but also you're very active in looking at new technologies and new products that can be made available not just to the 27 member states, but also to provide these around the globe, either as exports or as aid. Share a little bit about that as far as how the delegation may be involved and help to shape and mold some of that activity.
Well, generally the approach that we have set ourselves with the time horizon of 2020 is to marry the economic recovery that we're striving to achieve in the current time of crisis with a green economic recovery. Because whatever we do now has a lock-in effect. When you build infrastructure, it's going to be around for a long time. That's true for transport, that's true for energy, that's true for almost everything that we build. Whatever we decide will be around for a long time. So now's the time to reinvest, creating jobs, creating innovation, but doing so in a way that's compatible with what is known as sustainable development. In other words, living within our means ecologically.
Sure. But looking at it as far as looking at green jobs, there's some debates in certain countries about what does green jobs really mean and green technologies. How would, through the delegation and through the European Union, is that really defined, and what's the long-term impact as far as employment is concerned?
Right. I think it's much more important than defining green jobs, which is an activity that you can conduct endlessly. What we should instead show is what we're doing. So we have these policies on energy, on climate change, on air quality, on water quality, like here, and all sorts of other issues, and it leads to new activity, it leads to innovation. So those entrepreneurs, those inventors who have a product that really helps you cleaning up the water, they get a market. You create a new space for them. And I think that's the innovation side of it that is sometimes misunderstood and very important to convey.
Well, I think as we move forward, and as you know, the mantra around the globe is jobs, 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 and more jobs. It really is very important that we have this innovation, this technology, and then to make this available around the globe. And I think through the delegation, what you're doing is you're introducing into the United States is that every country needs to be involved in this whole process, share back and forth, and then see how we can move forward with the very best technologies or even the processes that are involved.
Well, it's certainly part of our message that we give out to people that we meet, to our counterparts in the official circles, but also, of course, to the public at large, that this is really a way forward, that this is a win-win situation.
Right. Well, looking at this, what's the map that we have right here? I know we talked about the watersheds and what that means, and we talked about the quality of water. What are we looking at here?
Well, this is basically, that's our homework. Light color is good, dark color is bad. This is how big the risk is that these different areas won't achieve their quality targets for the year 2015. And maybe the biggest message to take away from here is that it's not all like one area is bad and another is good. It's scattered around because it's really linked to local specific issues. I mean, you see the Netherlands and Belgium, for example, that's a low-lying area which receives a lot of its water from upstream and also has a lot of high population density, a lot of agriculture, so there is a lot of pressure there. But you see other areas in Spain, for example, there is aridity there. Yeah? We have climate change. The climate is getting drier in the Mediterranean. That adds to the pressure as well as population density. So each area has its own issues that it needs to grapple with. And
so really what this is just like you said, this is really homework. This is a way to try to do an assessment and then year by year come up with the new charts, new targets, but a way that you're moving towards, which we're going to talk about another aspect of this, is that 2020 goal.
Indeed. So yeah, this is monitoring and reporting is the key to getting anywhere.
Well, we're going to leave with this right here. I think this is absolutely a pristine photograph, and this is kind of the ideal view. But we have about 30 seconds left. What it really is the view of the delegation as far as where we're going as we move through the 21st century? Well, we have risks and we have opportunities. And I think we need to go for the opportunities. We have a green growth agenda before us if we grasp it. If we fail, we could have bad consequences, but we have a chance to influence things for the better. We should do it. I think that's very much words of wisdom that comes from Gunter Hornendinger, who is the Counselor for Environment, the delegation of the European Union to the United States. And I think, Gunter, what you shared is it's very important that we always keep in focus what we're trying to do as we move forward in the 21st century, and that we're really working towards improving the environment for everyone. And thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain-link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them.
Why did we learn all this?
My mother,
my son,
my sister-in-law
were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can.
Please join us.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation. That's 1-877-842-3442.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty
and justice
for all.
In America, there's either room for everyone, or it's not America. Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, an up-to-date vaccination called the TD booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President and Executive Director of Emerald Planet in Washington, D.C., as we come to you from here to look in 143 different nations, looking for the technologies, the products, and the services that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. One of the big issues that we're facing, of course, is water and then the treatment through wastewater treatment and how this is being taken care of. The climate is becoming warmer in most countries around the globe. Many of the areas are having droughts and much drier. And then other places there are massive floods. So what are we going to be doing as far as dealing with these various issues? And we're looking at the European Union and some of the countries there that are making special attempts, and also through the delegation of the European Union to the United States, how the 27 member states are taking care of these technologies, the services and the products that really are being used now as we move towards 9 billion citizens on the planet by 2050. And we have a true expert sitting with us who's been with us before. Hans Kordick is the Council for Agriculture and Environment with the Embassy of Austria. And Hans, it's always good to have you with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me again. It's good to be here.
Well, we planned on having you back again in the future as well, because what you're doing in your country of Austria and also what you're doing through the European Union is just really phenomenal. And we have this, the map here, and we've actually had this on once before. We have a special saying about Austria. You want to share with that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the embassy, and then we'll get into the topic of this hour.
Well, Austria lies in the middle of Europe, but we like to consider it as the green heart of Europe, as environmental policy is part of every day in Austria. As you might recall from some of the classical musicals like The Sound of Music, Austria is a beautiful country with beautiful mountains, beautiful lakes and rivers, and it's sustainable development which is responsible to keep this beauty up to date. On the one hand, agriculture is an important part of our policy. Agriculture, we have the highest share of organic farmers in the European Union. More than 16% of our farmers practice organic. Forestry, we have near 48% of our countries covered with forest, giving us the fresh air that we need. Renewable energy, another hallmark of Austria. More than 30% of our energy supply comes from renewable sources. But last but not least, we also have very pristine waters.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wanted you to go through that whole litany of things because it's really phenomenal. Had a chance, as you know, last year to go into Corinthia and spent about 2 weeks there, and we're going to have 4 special shows coming up soon to show all of that. But it was really amazing the balance you have as far as you talked about the forest, the water, the farmlands, and just the overall nature of that whole area. And it was absolutely nobody you would talk with in Austria that wasn't really proud of the natural environment they have, and they want to guard it, but they still want to have a viable economy. So looking at that, how do you strike this balance, and how is that just imbued in just everybody that you have in Austria to keep this precious balance?
Well, I think that's an important point you mentioned. Yes, we are very environmental friendly, but we belong to the strongest economies. If you look at the per capita income, Austria is ranked number 10. So this is one important fact. Another is looking at unemployment. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the European Union. So those are two classical indicators showing that, yes, you can protect the environment but still have a strong economy.
I think this is one of the things, Hans, that the years now that I've known you that we've always talked about is this precious balance. Again, I'm using this term very purposely, this precious balance, because many people say either you have the economy or you have the environment. And of course, Emerald Planet started in 1973 saying we can always have a balance between those two. And actually, if we're active working on keeping the environment, that we can actually expand jobs and bring more investment and more dynamics to the economy.
But I think that's the key fact. It's all about sustainability, and sustainability is keeping balance. On the one hand, it's about economic sustainability. On the other hand, it's environmental sustainability, but also a third pillar, it's social sustainability, which can be kept, and our low unemployment rate is showing the way.
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to the map as far as Austria being the green heart of Europe. And in many ways, you're almost the green heart of the world right now because of my understanding going to all the lakes, that you can actually drink out of those lakes, and you know it's clean enough to be able to do that. And there's not many countries, as you know, Hans, where that's the case. But looking at this diversity of water issues that we have and also availability, how are you keeping this balance so that you're serving the needs of an expanding population, but at the same time making sure that this pristine water and then the wastewater treatment facilities, new activities in that, are all kept in balance?
Well, I think it's necessary to point out that Austria is in a very lucky situation. We have abundant water, not only in quantity, but also in highest quality. In fact, more than 50% of our drinking water is spring water coming from the mountains. And a classical example of this is the capital of Vienna, which has more than 90% of its water resources coming from the Styrian Alps. And it was two aqueducts which were built in the 19th century under the Emperor Francis Joseph I, and also inaugurated by him, and which give the Viennese the best drinking water without any treatment.
That's what's amazing, and looking at the various balance that you have here, showing these different technologies and products and how you're doing all this, is that this is something that really is historical as far as Austria is concerned. But it's amazing you're able to continue this through the 21st century, as many countries are just absolutely running out of water.
Well, as the slide shows, I think, like in all policies, it's necessary to bring all stakeholders on board, and water policy is here no different. And it's quite challenging because you have, on the one hand, agriculture and the industry responsible for 2/3 of our using of our water. You have tourism, which is very important to our GDP. And for tourism, we depend on also our pristine water to attract tourists coming to Austria. But you also have water flowing down our rivers, which we use for hydropower. And hydropower is the biggest producer of electricity in Austria. So there are numerous stakeholders involved, which all flow into our water policy.
And no pun intended on the flow, but you have all these stakeholders, and it's all moving parts too. That's the interesting thing about this, that you have all these competing interests, but yet again, as I had a chance to move for almost 15 days around amongst all these different groups, even civil society, they were absolutely animate that we want to keep a strong economy, but we also want to keep, pristine nature that we have. And so it's just really interesting, these three priorities, how, again, going back to this notion of balance.
Well, I think it's necessary to point out the EU Framework Directive. I think my predecessor before mentioned it. The EU Framework Directive has in its introduction a statement saying that water is not a commercial product in a classical way, but it's a heritage. And we need to protect the water, we need to defend it and treat it as such. And I think for Austria, we have we're in a very lucky situation, having a lot of water in high quality, but this also means great responsibility. Therefore, our water policy differs from many others, maybe in the developing side of the world, as we have abundant water, but our water policy is to protect that we have today, so we have the same quality of water tomorrow. Protection means protecting against natural hazards. 2/3 of our country are covered with mountains, the Alps. The population is in the valleys due to the climatic conditions, precipitation, and so on. You have a lot of endangerment of floodings. Therefore, water protection is, first of all, protecting against natural hazards. Second of all, it's protecting against pollution, because our water not only comes from the springs, but also groundwater.
Yeah, I want to insert one thing into, and this is something I observed when you fly over Austria, everywhere you go is forest. And this is something that we had talked with your ambassador about some time ago, as far as the amount of forest coverage that you have around the country. Share that with us, because that really goes to the heart of what we're talking about right now.
Well, in fact, we have a sustainable forest management. That means for every tree logged, at least another tree has to be planted. This is a law going back to 1868, if I recall correctly. So it has some history, over 150 years. And these forests, mounting up to 48% of our country, are responsible for the clean air we breathe, but also responsible for filtering the water and giving us the clean spring water that we have.
Well, Austria is a small country, small population base, but yet you have a tremendous influence as far as the world is concerned. And so this map is talking about international cooperation. Share a little bit about that, and we almost run out of time.
Well, we have Austria is a landlocked country. We have 8 neighboring countries. Water, as we know, does not make stop at the border. It doesn't know any political or administrative jurisdiction. Therefore, we need to cooperate with our neighbors. For instance, the example of the Danube, the famous Danube River, its river basin covers 18 countries, and there are transnational commissions in place to protect the water, to also regulate the rights in terms of hydropower. So there are different aspects being discussed on bilateral or multilateral level.
Well, we're going to leave on this scene here, because this is a very sophisticated, large wastewater treatment facility. How does this, what you've developed here, impact your outreach around the globe as far as the industries and the technologies of Austria?
Well, this specific picture shows the wastewater treatment plant in Vienna, and more than 90% of all buildings are connected to this sewage plant. And it is the biggest, the largest in terms of not only capacity, but also the technical innovations. But second of all,
we're going to have to leave this. Thank you very much for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
You've probably heard about heart disease, but did you know that it's the #1 killer of women nationwide? Heart disease claims more lives each year than breast cancer, lung cancer, or strokes combined. But there are steps you can take to protect yourself against it. For more information on how you can prevent heart disease, contact your local American Heart Association or visit their website at www.americanheart.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 143 different nations, countries that are contributing to society, but also the technologies, the services, and the products. They're helping to make the planet a better place in which to live. Many people are saying as we move towards 9 billion people, 9 billion souls on this planet by 2050, is that we're going to have to decrease the quality of living and that many of the people are going to be deprived of just basic human rights and natural resources that gives them a quality of life that we've enjoyed as we move through the 20th and the first part of the 21st century. We have many others that are saying that we have the intellectual property, we have the ingenuity, and we'll have the technologies that are actually going to increase the quality of living here. And so we have a person who's representing Sweden. We have Lars Friberg, who is the attaché in energy and climate. The Swedish Office of Science and Innovation in the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C. Lars has been with us before, and we welcome you back.
Thank you, Sam. I'm glad to be here.
It's always glad to have you share with us. And we have this first slide. We said, well, we'll take a little bit of time and talk about the House of Sweden, where you are here in Washington, D.C., but just give us a little background on Sweden, and then we'll move into this whole thing as far as water and wastewater treatment.
I have the privilege and opportunity to work out of one of the most beautiful embassies here in Washington, D.C., the House of Sweden, which is now a little more than 5 years old. And it's right on the Potomac, the only embassy actually that has a riverside view. And the readers of Washington Post voted that we was the best embassy a couple of years ago, and we're very happy about that. So a lot of the work that we do there on the public diplomacy is to talk about some of the solutions that we have and interact with our American counterparts on that. Right now we have a theme on innovation and education, where different aspects come up.
Well, I think this is one of the things, you know, as far as having this Office of Science and Innovation, you know, within the embassy, I think that speaks a whole lot about Sweden, what it's doing, and the interaction between the United States, because you're going beyond just government agencies, but you're talking to businesses, research institutes, universities, many others here, and then you're sharing that information back in Sweden. So it's interesting, this two-way flow that you have through your embassy here.
Yeah. Well, Sweden is a small country. We're only the population of 9 million people, but we're the size of California, more or less. But we are a very export-oriented economy and very knowledge-intensive. So actually the government is right now finalizing an innovation strategy, and innovation is driving the new products that we're producing. And in the green technology field, that's one of the key areas where we are expanding even further.
Well, one of the things, this old photograph here, this really goes back to the days when Sweden decided to get very serious about water and wastewater, which is really the thrust of what we're talking about in this particular program. And so you're very early on into this as far as looking at the science and the technology combined in order to have a better quality of living for all of your citizens, but also you're able to share this around the globe.
Yeah. Sweden has a lot of water. We have more than 100,000 lakes in Sweden, but the quality of it has not always been good. So in 1834, we had a very severe cholera epidemic in Stockholm, the capital, that killed several thousand people, about 1 in every 20 person. And following that, the discussion started on trying to address this issue. And then in the 40s and 1940s, there was a law passed that started the building of wastewater treatment plants, and that was then expanded. And even though for a while after industrialization, the water quality in Stockholm and around there was so poor you couldn't go swimming anymore. It was banned in the 30s. But now it is so clean again that you can fish right outside the parliament. You have 24 public baths in the different lakes and this water you have. And that's just one example of how water issues have been starting to be addressed in Sweden, not just in Stockholm, but across the country.
Well, looking at it as far as the water regulations, I know this is a very touching photograph you have here, but there are many countries across the globe that just don't have the ample supplies that you have. But at the same time, they have to cherish and nurture exactly what they have. How these regulations can be used in many other countries, particularly in the developing world, that could be as an example, so that they, even though they have less amount of water, but actually can make better use of it.
Yeah. Sweden, as I mentioned, is very fortunate. We're very well endowed with water, and as climate change continues, we will actually get even more water probably. So one of the challenges we're looking at is how can we help other parts of the world that aren't as fortunate and are going to be water stressed. And as you know, 2/3 of U.S. arable land is currently in drought, and so it's an issue that's not just affecting poor countries, but also here in the U.S. And Sweden has a lot of technology that we're trying to share, and a large part of our overseas development cooperation aid goes to this sector.
Mm-hmm. Well, looking at the slide that we have here, and I think three are really clustered together, Lars, but looking at the quality of water, I know that it's very methodical as far as you've looked at it. You're trying to look at it across the country, but also your juxtaposition to, you know, the European Union, and so they look to Sweden as far as a leader in all this, but at the same time being able to share what you're investing and how you're addressing these issues. So let's take these three and just talk through this a little bit and how this would impact, because you know, we have audiences in Asia, South America, and Africa, so we would definitely want to share that. So let's just take these through. Go ahead.
So in the 1990s, Sweden, or the Swedish Parliament, decided on 16 environmental quality targets that were going to be attained over time, and 4 of those cover water issues. Mm-hmm. And one of them is then zero eutrophication, and that is cutting the amount of nutrients that come out in the water and cause algae blooms.
And this is like from farms, from industries,
farm
and
runoff,
from households,
or sewage runoff,
even golf courses, what have you.
Exactly. And because, especially on the eastern part of Sweden, which is facing the Baltic Sea, that's kind of a closed-in ocean. It only has a small outlet. So there's a lot of runoffs from the 12 countries that are around it. And for that reason, Sweden is working very closely with our neighbors here. And after the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall, a lot of Swedish water management went into helping these countries, the former Eastern Bloc countries, to start building up their water treatment plants, because it was more efficient for Swedish taxpayers' money to be spent overseas to get the Baltic Sea better than to spend it even more on getting the Swedish water treatment even better.
Well, I think this really goes back to what we were talking about earlier as far as the Swedish Office of Science and Innovation. Is really, it's a very enlightened attitude that it has, that it wants to take what it's learning as the best practices and then spread this to other countries, and also to be able to implement and to perfect these innovations that you've had.
Yeah, there is actually in one of the most innovative new neighborhoods that are being built or is built in Stockholm. They also have there an R&D water treatment plant where a lot of the new technologies going beyond the traditional ABC structures that you've seen in the 20th century, and trying to remove in order to get, for example, getting energy back from the wastewater, because there is a lot of energy there. So some of this has led to that something like 120 buses in Stockholm are running on biogas that comes from this wastewater, the energy that you have in the wastewater that is then being generated. So if we can just pull this one up on big, that shows you what I was talking about earlier, how Sweden is working together with the other countries around the Baltic Sea, because the water is flowing from all these countries into the sea, into the Baltic Sea, and therefore we have to work together in addressing these issues.
Well, looking at this, Lars, as far as the water quality, but also you're improving the air and soil quality at the same time, which then goes to a better quality food, better quality environment for people to live in their daily lives. And so it's just amazing how something like this, the ramifications and the ripple effect to all of this.
Well, the quality of life you get from this is really one of the central issues that we're looking at. I was actually personally myself just up hiking in the north of Sweden, and the fact that you can just dip your mug into any stream or any lake that you pass by and drink that water, that's really a quality of life that we have and that Swedish really cherish, because people care very much about environmental issues. And there is a consensus across the board in the different political parties in Parliament that this is really something that we all care for this generation, but also for coming generations.
Well, and also looking at that too, as far as the Parliament is concerned, there's a consensus within your government that we have to protect the environment. Again, this balance as we talk with other countries as far as the economy is concerned, but also it allows you to develop new greener technologies that then you can export abroad as you've developed within your own country. So what is the long-term impact? One, I know you have very low water rates there, but what's the other impact as far as having these more advanced technologies as you're moving forward in the 21st century?
Well, given that the biggest export markets are in the rapidly emerging economies in Asia and Latin America, a lot of those, and also with the growing urbanization, having enough water and also good water in these cities and countries is really a key issue. And given that we then have the technology that we have developed over time in Sweden, there's a lot of potential in trying to grow that export in Sweden. And one thing that we just are doing now is, for example, Atlas Copco, which is a Swedish company that was recently named one of the most 100 innovative countries in the world. They just developed a mobile scrubber. So for ships, they can clean up the sulfur emissions from a ship. Normally, you don't have any regulation to take care of that, and they have the technology now that can start doing that.
Well, we're going to move forward, but I wanted to go back because this is where some of the energy that you were talking about earlier, Lars, is actually going into these buses.
Yeah.
And biogas is being used, and the buses obviously are doing very well on that. But this is really the last photograph I wanted to get to.
No, this is what I mentioned before, that we now have such a clean water that, for example, you can fish salmon just outside the Parliament, and given that Swedes really care for this, you can go swimming in the middle of the city and sailing and kayaking and all these things that people really enjoy. And that's also one thing that reads why Sweden is getting increasingly popular as a tourist attraction. People enjoy coming.
I think it's fantastic.
And they are most welcome.
Well, I'm sure of that. And thank you, Lars Freiberg, who is the attaché for energy and climate with the Embassy of Sweden. And thank you for being us as we look around the globe to create
Thank you for having
the
me,
Emerald
Sam.
Planet.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we're looking around the globe in 143 different nations, looking for the technologies, the products, and the services that are making a difference as the planet moves towards 2050 and 9 billion souls on the planet. So we have a special emphasis paving the way to 2050, the future Earth. And so we're looking at many of the technologies, but also the countries, the governmental organizations, and the multilateral, multinational organizations that are having a true impact as we move through to 2050. And so we have one organization which is really premier in the Washington, D.C. area, but is spread all across the globe, is what's called the Delegation, the European Union to the United States, with many offices abroad. And their outstanding Counselor of the Environment, Gunter Homninger, has been with us before. And Gunter, welcome back.
Pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you here. And Gunter is really, you've shared many ideas, but also the enthusiasm that you have as far as the delegation itself and what it's doing in the United States with other countries really is to be admired. Tell us a little bit about the delegation of the European Union, and then we'll move into the theme of this particular program.
Well, thank you. It's our job to represent the European Union. So we have our 27 member states. They have, of course, embassies here, each of them. And we have the delegation which represents the European Union overall. So we are a diplomatic organization, and we are here to develop the relationships between the United States and Europe further. And that has become much more important in recent years. We now have a new treaty for the European Union enforced, the Lisbon Treaty. As a result, a new organization has been created in the institutions that shape Europe, and that's the European External Action Service, which, if you will, is the equivalent of a foreign ministry at the European level. And so we're represented here. We cover all the policies that the EU is competent to engage in. According to the EU treaty, that involves, of course, normal diplomatic relations on a number of issues, and environment policy is an important part in that.
Yeah, and it's very critical, too, that you have the status here and abroad, because it gives you input in what's going on. You also have a similar liaison office with the United Nations in New York, which is very important. And also you have your own ambassador who's credited to the government here. Introduce your ambassador, and then we're going to get into this broad policy that's coming up for 2020.
Well, our ambassador, Mr. João Vale de Almeida, he's originally from Portugal, which you might have gleaned from the name. He used to be somebody in the European Commission, quite high up for quite a while. He's now our ambassador here, leading a team of some more than 90 people to help us in our outreach and represent Europe and make the best possible of our presence here in order to develop our bilateral relations.
Well, one of the things that in reading about, I was very intrigued about the special EU, the 20 by 20 by 20 by 2020. So there's lots of 20s in there, but this is very important what you're doing, and it relates to everything that we're talking about as far as water, wastewater, but the essence of environmental quality, not only for the European Union, but really for the globe.
Yeah, this triple 20 target, which is a little difficult to spell out, is a target that primarily focuses on energy and on climate change, on climate policy. So the first 20% is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 20% compared to 1990 by the year 2020. The second one is a share of renewable energy to 20%, also in that same year. And the third one is an increase in energy efficiency by 20%. And you might say, what has that to do with water? Well, in fact, things that have to do with climate change and with our energy mix have to do with everything. And water and energy are intricately mixed, from the amount of water you need to run power plants, in fact, to the amount of water available to run hydropower plants, for example. There is a big intricate mix. And vice versa, of course, water quality being very important and influenced in a very important manner by the conditions that we find.
Well, I think so too, and this is something most people don't realize, is that all the carbon that goes into the wastewater treatment systems, and then how this can be used to create, a biomass which can be then converted into energy, not only to run the plants, but also, as we've heard, in some countries, it's running the local buses. It can go into the general mix as far as the fuel needs of a country. So it's very important to look at the new technologies being developed, that it's not just waste, but actually this is a renewable resource.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, wastewater, which we tend to think of as something disgusting, which we have to treat anyway, turns out to be a resource if you handle it in the right way. So on the one hand, given how densely populated Europe is, and how much of a pressure we have on our water quality, we absolutely need to treat our wastewater anyway. We have legal instruments that enforce that. And then the technologies that you need to deploy to do that turn out to be, producing energy almost as a side effect. So that is something that is a beautiful synergy.
No, it really is. And looking at the 20 by 20 by 20, I'm going to continue using this because I want to ingrain this with the viewers that we have. What's some of the things that you're actually learning from this experience that is being used by the 27 members of the European Union, but also now you're able to share abroad to, the world community?
Well, one thing it does, it kickstarts innovators. So when you have a target to reach a certain amount of renewable energy, you need to get that energy from somewhere. You need the plant, but you also need the local arrangements. And you find that some countries found arrangements that motivate their local authorities, that motivate their communes to actually start thinking about being energy independent, producing their own energy. It's an enormous dynamism that's created that way.
Well, this is something that we started the Emerald Planet in 1973 based on conservation and energy independence, and so we come all these many years later as we move through the 21st century, and this is becoming a theme, a major theme really, as we move around the globe. But this one slide that we have here, I know this is something that as the amount of runoff and amount of rain that's coming, because there are drier areas, but also the rain is becoming harder. It's going in and it's actually eroding or destroying much of the infrastructure. And so I know this is one of the things that you're looking at in this 20 by 20 by 20 project, is how do we address ameliorating, these swings as far as the climate is concerned. And as we move through the 21st century, how do we use this to our advantage instead of just having the destruction of, too much water, not enough water, and these kinds of impacts on the environment?
Well, this is of course technically slightly separate from the climate policy. It's a relatively recent arrival in our arsenal of water policy instruments. We have a directive that's a European legal instrument on floods. And that basically, it's motivated by data like the graph shows that we just see. Probably too small to be read.
Let's bring this slide up so we can see it full scale. There we go.
These are costs that some European member states have had over the period of time shown from floods, and in one extreme case it reaches 0.7% of GDP almost, which is an absolutely horrific number. Over that same period of time, more than 1,000 people died in floods in Europe. 500,000 were displaced. So this is really something we need to get going at. And that directive basically motivates the member states to map out where the risk is, to check what they can do in terms of mitigation, to make sure we're prepared the next time. So floods are really big issue. When you look at the map on the next slide, maybe, you see that it's scattered all over. It clusters in certain areas. This is about how many floods occurred in certain parts of Europe. And you see in some parts, obviously, much more than in others. But it's an issue where we really need to get going. And it's an aspect that maybe you don't see immediately when you look at things such as water quality or water quantity, but it's something that becomes all the more pronounced as we get ever more densely populated and develop ever more property closer and closer to the water.
Well, the whole thing is that over 54% of the world's population in general are now in urban areas, but if you look at a country like Brazil or even a country like India, sometimes 70-80% of the population are living in urban areas, and so this impact is immediate and now. But looking at this goes back to these best practices and the services that can be provided through the European Union. If you look at a country like, say, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, all clustered together, but yet suffer horrific floods on an annualized basis, and then you move in some places in the Middle East, either no water whatsoever, or again along the Nile, you'll have floods at the same time. Okay. So how can we extrapolate and then share this information across the globe in places that are rapidly urbanizing? There's a degradation as far as the quality of not just the water, but also the air and the soil, and can be used to help plan and take care of, say, a country like Bangladesh that has over 100 million people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's clear that you can't simply take a solution for one country and just apply it somewhere else. But because the European Union is so diverse, we have countries in the north with loads of snow, and we have countries in the south with arid conditions and very hot sun. We have very different conditions, and we also have very political organization, very political orientations, and all that must come together to form the EU policy. So if you will, we are a laboratory that shows how you can bring these very diverse strands of interests together, and maybe that's the biggest added value we can offer to the world.
Yeah, and I think this is something, and I had a chance to actually go through some of the documentation or the broad objectives of this 2020 by 2020, and it really looks like that there are many practical applications of this, but it's really almost hard to imagine how you go across 27 different governments and all their central governments and then feeding into the European Union itself. So how is that delicate balance where you try to get consensus at the same time bring benefit to all the member countries?
Right. I think the only things that get ever decided at the EU level are those where people clearly see that really there is an advantage for them in it. And so even though it's difficult for every one of them and they all need to move, they all do. Take one of those 20s, which is the renewable energy. The way that target was set, half of the distance to target was equally distributed among all. The other half was distributed by GDP per capita, basically. So people looked at what can you do and what should you have to do, and you make a package out of that. And you can do it if the will is really there. And I think that's the key. The European population supports this. So.
And I think this is something, Gunther, that you shared with us. You're doing the other part of these 20s and 20s is as far as water, the wastewater, and then of course the air and soil quality that you have at the same time, because many people really don't have the interplay, the interconnectedness of air, soil, and water.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the 20s is energy and climate change, and the other policies just are intricately linked, and it's really important to emphasize how much one influences the other.
Yeah, well, you did an absolutely fantastic job. We're going to be doing the credits as we sit here for about the next 25 seconds.